Excerpt from Contact Report 582 translation.
Tai explains how the plegarian react when a person passes away at the same time of a marriage, birthday, etc. They also discuss about the plegarian voting system and also about the intermingling of people.
Thanks, but about what we have just spoken, that's not actually what particularly concerns me today, but rather it is something which I would like to know regarding how you yourself takes care to behave when a death occurs and at the same time something festive. At the same time I want to ask, how do you handle it when a friendship of a person very close to you is laid to the last rest, but at the same time a celebration is also pending, for example a marriage or engagement in one's own family, such as of one's own children, as well as the relatives? What do you plegarian consider as an overriding obligation, an engagement or marriage or the last honors acknowledgments with regard to the deceased person who is laid to rest?
What you call as a precedental duty is understood and maintained by us in such a way that, first and foremost a deceased human being in their bedding of rest, as you bring forth the sensitive expression, is offered their last respects and appreciation. This goes before all festivities of any kind. Indeed, even if such arises in one's own family. Therefore, if a laying to rest is pending at the same time as a marriage of one's own children, for example, if the parents or one parent stand in a close, honest friendship connection with a human being and he or she dies, then it must be implicit that the last honors acknowledgments and appreciation stands as first duty and priority with the laying to rest, whereas the festivity of marriage will be left out of the attention, even of one's own children and relatives. We are not acquainted with a betrothal celebration, as you maintain such, because with us such an action goes forth without celebration, because when two human beings provisionally join together for a communality of living in order to later unite in an open or closed bond, then that is done in a simple wise. Our mentality as well as customs and traditions necessitate that without exception everything is handled as I have explained, and indeed this applies for all our errant peoples. A different mode of action must not and cannot be, as in every case when a laying to rest is pending, the last offering of honors and appreciation is presented for a human being who was near or closely connected in honest friendship. Therefore, in such a situation, to participate in a marriage celebration will never be taken into consideration. Indeed, even if such takes place in one's own family, that is with one's own descendants, because the last honors expressions and appreciation for the deceased human being, with whom was stood in honest, close and good friendship, is an unconditional duty. If this is not fulfilled, then this corresponds to a decensylessness and dishonorableness beyond compare.
This I understand in a similar context, because already in my boyhood, your father's father had pointed out to me, when my paternal side grandmother died, with whom I was strongly connected, that it would not be compatible with my duty to go to a small birthday celebration of a comrade instead of to the last honors. Already at that time, this had made a very deep impression upon me, which is why later in India, Pakistan, in Turkey, as well as in Greece and in Italy, that is in Sicily, in Trapani, I had also understood the actions of the human beings, when they went to the funeral of their longtime friends instead of the wedding of their children. Also, 2 days ago, I had searched around in the memory banks of Nocodemion and indeed also found evidence of this mode of conduct, hence even at very early times were things handled in such a way. If I precisely consider that which you have said in what's Foth suggested to me, then about this I can also understand that a final honor and appreciation of a deceased human being is therefore much more important than a wedding celebration, because the honoring and appreciation of the deceased human being can only be given so long as he or she, that is the body, is not yet buried, and therefore his or her flightal swinging waves are still present and perceptible in some wise or other. This, whereas for having the wedding, also there for one's own family members, like children, but also relatives, the life is still to come, and these therefore can still be shown honor and appreciation for a long time.
How you understand this, we also understand this.
Then I now have a question which refers to your countries and peoples. With yourselves, how do you keep it with regard to the mixing of peoples? As with us for years, worldwide this comes about through asylum seekers, displaced people and economic refugees as well as criminals and so forth, from many states. Especially such arises with us on the earth, particularly in relation to Switzerland, Germany, France, Austria, England, US America, Australia and Canada, because innumerable humans immigrate to these industrial states. Here I speak not of the necessary specialists of different professions that are needed in all of the countries mentioned, but I'm talking effectively only of those who are dubious asylum seekers, refugees, economic refugees and criminals. Of course, that the overpopulation plays an essential role with the entirety of the immigrants in the industrialized states, that's clear. Consequently the peoples no longer remain amongst themselves, but in many cases also mix through marriage, which again brings new problems with it, and indeed also with regard to the health, diseases, politics, and rising life incapabilities and so on.
Our peoples are all living in a democracy, of the freedom and of the peace, so therefore no comparison can be drawn to what is happening on the earth. There would have to exist very big efforts, in order to pacify to all the countries and peoples of the earth, if the same conditions should apply, as is the case with us on Era, thus no dictatorship, no hostilities, no despotism and otherwise no other Gewalt. 1. Dominations of any kind may prevail, but only a purely democratic peoples determining authority. Every empire and kingdom, as well as every republic, even if they call themselves democratic, correspond to no more than dictatorships, because in these, only those who have might, who themselves are able to make determinations, prevail with Gewalt and coercion. In addition, I must say, how you have already mentioned this now and then, that even Switzerland is not an actual direct democracy, because as long as the people, solely and exclusively, do not decide in every respect, that is has the first and the last word, as you had said this once, but rather that only the government decides certain things, as well as diverse parties have different views and represent varying interests in an unambiguous matter, so long can it not be spoken of as a direct democracy, but rather just a partial democracy. With that said, what I declare, I will not, cannot and may not interfere with the politics of Switzerland, because with my statement I only make that clear, what we pledge and understand by direct democracy and how, in this wise, we handle it. Furthermore, it must be said that our system knows a world government, which demands general democratic forms by all countries and peoples, as well as that of absolute peace and freedom for the people and the individual human must prevail, and that therefore no war or other hostile acts may take place one against the other. Furthermore, an absolutely free circulation of goods and persons on the whole of Era is given, wherein regarding this extreme care is taken that no flora or fauna seeds or even plants, as well as any fauna forms of life are transported from one region to another, as unfortunately the opposite is the case on the earth through the stupid and irrational globalization, by which originates much damage and where through all sorts of coming calamities are yet to be wrought. So there is no border customs for persons and wares with us on Era, and every human being can freely go anywhere to wherever he or she wants, without being controlled by officials, and so on. Now, even though everything is free and open, every country's territory has its own territorial boundaries, which are respected in complete uniformity by all peoples and not violated. Each country and nation governs itself in spite of the world government, and indeed independently according to their own customs and traditions, wherein no regulations of the global governance are given, because this is only authorized to ensure that our world system of values is preserved with regard to peace and freedom, and for the legislation of the planet as also with regard to the dealings with the governments and peoples of other planets, regarding the regular and special legislations for all the necessities of everyday life and of the life. This is nationwide and peoples-wide, internationally, uniform throughout and directed to absolute humanity, justice and equality for all human beings, So therefore only a single identical legislation and applicable law is laid down worldwide and is valid for all human beings. So, laws and ordinances cannot be bent, what you had once, in relation to the earthly laws and so forth, referred to as rubber paragraphs and rubber laws, as is the case in the legislation of all nations of the earth, which are also in part severely human unlawful, such as with regard to the torture and the death penalty. And as for the intermingling between our peoples, it must be said that such occurs only in rare cases, in the wise when members of different peoples enter into bonds with one another, which however is actually extremely rare. The rule is that the individual peoples and the prevalent ethnic groups in these dwell amongst themselves and therefore neither mix nor change their customs and traditions through other cultural influences. This helps that each ethnic group's own system of health and all their characteristics are preserved, which contributes to the fact that diseases no longer appear, or even if, then only very rarely. The whole issue of this non-mixing of peoples also contributes in that no diseases and epidemics are carried about, as well as one people's part doesn't clash into some troubles with another one's, either with regard to foreignness or race nor concerning goods, products or language, etc. Since, as a rule, the members of a peoples remain amongst themselves, with only very few exceptions and very rare intermingling partnerships. Also no mixing of peoples and foreign hostile and race. Hostile conflicts arise with other peoples or between families and neighbors, etc. And what is also extremely important, is the fact that we know no religions and sects, as well as no different political parties and orientations. All pledgarian nations are solely and equally inclined to the creational natural laws and recommendations, which are taught by the spiritual leadership. Consequently, with us pledgarian there is neither religious nor sect hatred, nor religious or sectarian cult activities, rites, or any other such sectarian hostilities. Finally, what is still very important to say, is the fact that there isn't any prostitution in all our peoples in accordance with their entire cultural behavior and as a result of the legislation, such as regarding the turning to the creational, natural laws and recommendations. Everything is so regulated with us with regard to the democratic determinations of the people, that all peoples, that is their populations or information, technology connected with the center of the world government as well as with the respective people's authority, which itself works out, on the one hand, agenda items as well as proposals from the authorities of the people or individual persons' proposals, and puts these up for the evaluation and vote of all populations. Regarding this, all peoples that is their populations are requested, 3 hours before a vote that is before a ballot, as you say in the given situation, to be present for a ballot for a certain period of time at the corresponding devices or those several which are mounted in public everywhere and in dwellings for voting operations. The accrued matter which is brought to a vote will then firstly be officially announced just 3 hours after the populations are present at the ballot devices. The announcing of the ballot agenda item, which is always handled just a single item per time, takes place in such a wise that not only will all advantages be named and explained in detail, but also all of the disadvantages. Only after this, when all the facts of the positives and negatives are cited, begins the period of the considering and reconsidering of the ballot agenda item put forward, for which a period of around 30 minutes, according to your terms of time, is set, while the human beings of all populations can electronically make known their position, that is a yes or no, which of course will be automatically registered and tallied up. In this wise, it is given that no gatherings of people can take place, in order to bring about a mass persuasion. Therefore all persons voting must make their own opinion known. All accrued election agenda items of any kind are handled in this wise. And indeed also with regard to an appointing of persons in the world government and the people's authorities. Additionally, it must still be said, that the world government and the authorities are no more and no less than merely democratic representatives of the people. These exercise only the supervision with regard to the compliance with the laws and regulations as well as the decisions of the indigenous peoples, together with their corresponding assigned forces of order, whereby however, they have no self determining gewalt. because the determination of all concerns and things is situated solely in the might of the planetary or national population. The world government and the people's authorities must therefore never act otherwise, as this is determined by the planetary or national population.
Then the whole thing is based on a kind of internet? How does it stand, however, when crises and emergencies arise that require a quick decision and a prompt action?
According to your understanding, you can call the whole thing as such, and when a crisis or an emergency arises, which then requires a quick decision and a prompt action, then the whole planetary population or each relevant population of the people is called to the voting machines, namely in the form of a general mobilization alarm call, where only 1 hour's time will be given for that to become active. Then every person has the right to duly raise comments, which are heard and discussed, from which ultimately a logical decision must come forth, which is then put to the vote. However, such situations are more than extremely rare, consequently a last such mobilization dates back 2 decades.
However, if such a case of a mobilization occurs, then that can perhaps take a long time until something is well regulated.
Such can actually take up much time, whereby however, crises and emergencies are extremely rare, as I said a little while ago.
And who leads and then directs the whole thing in such situations? And generally, what is the nature of such crises and emergency situations?
When it comes to planetary matters, they are carried out and handled by the spiritual leadership familiar with the matter, and in collaboration with the world government and the world's population. When it just concerns matters pertaining to a country, then the authorities of the peoples concerned and the corresponding populations are needed. And concerning the crisis and emergency situations, these can be very different, such as for example regarding a tactical intervention, if such is demanded from a region of a people or an entire planet of the Pledgeran Federation, even extensive relief operations in one or more peoples, or even a whole planet of the Federation may be possible, such as in the case of threatening dangers from outer space or with natural disasters, and so on.
Then with regard to era, actually there are seen more external, that is extraplanetary situations, than just those that apply to era and its population?
This is the case, yes, because on era we have reported, for as long as anyone can remember, no more crises and emergency situations, neither with regard to natural events nor with respect to the population.
How nice if that would also be the case on the Earth. But if I gather correctly from your words, then at the very least not everyone in the Pledgeran Federation stands in such a high level of development as you Pledgeran, or am I wrong here? Is there in the Federation perhaps still peoples who are somehow unpeaceful and make trouble?
You are not wrong, because although we Pledgeran are making great efforts, Federation-wide, to keep everything in a peaceful form, various Federation peoples are still deplorably devoted to unpeacefulness and thus also armed confrontations, which sometimes requires, yet only rarely however, our intervention. However, any intervention on our part must firstly be approved by a consent of the total population of the Pledgeran, wherein the pros and cons will extensively be discussed and weighed out, as our democratic vote formulas demand this. The reconnaissance work regarding this is carried out by specialized spiritual guides and law enforcement forces, which also have the corresponding forward-looking capabilities in order to predict what will result as effects from the causes, which are taken.
And how about it, when lots of folks come forward for a word, is there not a mess? And when I think that the entire world population gets in on the act, then
much attention is taken to ensure that order prevails and therefore no Orsarchanjan, 2, comes forth. Therefore in each case it is carefully handled and spoken, whereby no excessive chatter arises and the individuals who have something to say will not be interrupted if their objections and contributions are pertinent and correspond to the rationality. Thereby the rule applies that only short and concise objections, clarifications and suggestions, as well as the listing of possibilities and necessary actions and so forth will be made. Those fond of speaking, who want to run the speech marathons, there are indeed those unfortunately, but every such word barrage is interrupted and the word is passed on to the next person who has something to bring forward. The fact that several people talk together, this is not permitted. Therefore, regarding this, there is no mayhem. Therefore, it may well take several hours or 2 or more days under certain circumstances before a promising rational solution comes about and to a vote, which is useful and gives enough consideration to the crisis at hand or the emergency problem.
With us, one says, long speech, short sense. Unfortunately, with the running of long speeches without actually saying something substantial, this is also the case with us on the earth in politics. This is also expressed in our group every now and then, because similarly not everything is perfect with us. Some humans just like to hear themselves talk. But it is gratifying to hear that this problem occurs not only with some of our group members as well as with the politicians and people of our earthly peoples, but in your population as well. If I now understand correctly, then it is with you in such discussions of voting, commitment and action, since around such it is indeed my opinion, therefore no joyful chattering, but given the opportunity, only reasonable words, statements, action requirements and modes of behavior.
That is so. Each speech marathon will be stopped, and any problems at hand of any kind must be quickly, well and efficiently handled and supplied a solution. Therefore nothing should be pushed onto the back burner, as you tend to say at times. In addition, it is correct what you say, that long speeches often yield little or no sense at all, but lead only to endless and fruitless discussions, which causes much more unclearness than clearnesses and valuable decisions, because no effective solutions can be found. Good and proper decisions come about only through summarial, concise, and thus unambiguous and clear as well as through the rationality carrying words.
That is also my opinion. If I have understood correctly, then one could understand the whole of your democracy similarly to a democratic rural community, as we still have this in Switzerland in the cantons of Glarus and Appenzell, whereby beforehand, regarding the election process, no propaganda, that is advertising for a matter may be made, as this is however the case elsewhere than the mentioned rural communities in Switzerland. So that with you no mass persuasion can take place, as also no gathering of people can take place, as you had said, being that the election agenda is called only a short time before the elections open. And since the time for the election is only 30 minutes, and so each person is practically situated only by themselves and with their own opinion, no nationwide and partisan election propaganda can take place. Also as a result, no party system and no party dictatorship can take place, and I find that fair, good and democratic.
That is correct. We handle a direct democracy in this wise, which in every respect prescribes that neither the world government nor the authorities of the countries and their peoples may take any of their own decisions nor make regulations, unless the entire planet's population has decided about that based on a ballot and has considered something as right. As I explained, all countries, that is their populations, have a uniform legislation, valid planet-wide and a determination of might, as well as with regard to all other things that uniformly affect all peoples. If the authorities are elected in a nation, then this of course pertains only to the nation, that is its population, although the voting process remains the same, as if a planet-wide vote takes place.
So only the people can determine who belongs to the people's authority or to the world government?
This is indeed so, because such a process of a direct democracy corresponds solely in this wise.
Clear, understood. Then I've got just one question still with regard to the traumatic experiences which makes a human being. Your father's father once said that these affect the genes and practically program them, thereby precisely bequeathing such experiences to the progeny. Can you say something about that?
What my father said corresponds to what actually is. Traumatic experiences strain the thoughts and feelings and therefore also the psyche, whereby these three factors influence and program the genes, as you say. With regard to the genes, thereby the following is to be understood. A gene is a segment of the DNA, At the same time, the genes form several aggregated bases, which make up a unit. They contain the basic information for the production of RNA, which corresponds to a section of the DNA. The genes may also be referred to as characteristic structures because they take over a particular function, such as the color of the hair, and so forth. A gene is also a hereditary factor, just because it carries the genetic information in itself. Consequently, the genes are responsible for ensuring that information once stored therein is passed on from generation to generation, that is, that characteristics once fixed in the genes find its hereditary based expression in the progeny, that is transferred, wherein the DNA also plays a role, because DNA is the actual genetic substance, out of which genes and plasmids also consist of. A gene is a DNA segment, on which the code is given for a specific protein molecule. A plasmid is a small piece of DNA, wherein this is a closed ring form and can contain multiple genes. However, regarding the inheritance of traumatic experiences and living experiences that are deposited in the genes by the thoughts, feelings, and by the psyche as well as by physical factors, is to be said that these are inherited through numerous generations and thus in the long run characterize the descendants and their descendants and in turn their descendants and so on and so forth. Also stress syndromes as well as phobias and even habits and idiosyncrasies, as well as modes of behavior and body postures and body movements, etc. are just as much inheritance-based factors as well as intellect, rationality and intelligence, wherein everything can be both in the positive as in the negative.